I can tell you that in the 70s, in the early 70s, General Motors had about 50% market share. Now they got 14. Watch how that shrinks when the Chinese start showing up. It's going to be the same scenario as when the Japanese first started to come into the United States. The paint job was great. The fit and finish was unheard of. It was reliable. You could not beat these things, and that's what's happening now. Only difference is it's going to be the Chinese and Tesla that mop the floors with the other guys.
Yeah.
We have a lot of experts here in Munro, and we're going to talk about what we think is going to happen in the next 5 years, because it's going to be earth-shattering. These guys that are hoping that people are going to come back to the good old days or the old-fashioned ways are in for a giant surprise. We all pretty much know that these companies won't die, at least not right away, but they're going to come real close to death, and they're definitely going to be losing market share. And I can tell you what, I'm going to show you some stuff that's really going to make you wonder how these guys are even going to survive next week, let alone the next 10 years.
Hey guys, welcome to Connecting the Dots, the podcast where we follow the breadcrumbs and try to predict where disruptions will take us. In this video, I want to connect a few disjointed dots that together show a tsunami heading from China towards Western OEM shores. It's a tsunami that should arrive much faster than most people, even you, might think, and its effects will be devastating. I'll start by showing a huge problem that Western OEMs are facing, even without the Chinese invasion. I'll then show how Chinese brands have prepared for the upcoming invasion. I'll state when the invasion is scheduled to start, why it's scheduled for that specific time, and then provide preliminary signs that show this is true. I'll check whether Western OEMs can retaliate by attacking the Chinese on their own shore. And finally, I'll provide the expected effects on both Western OEMs and on Tesla, and give my opinion as a long-term investor on how it should affect Tesla's stock price, as well as GM stock, Ford stock, and BMW stock prices. I value your time, so as always, I'll start with the bottom line and say that the Chinese invasion has officially started a few weeks ago. Sure, it's still barely noticeable, but now that the green light has been given, expect to see Chinese car sales grow exponentially in Western markets. If you haven't done that already, please subscribe to the channel and smash the like button to support it. It really helps the channel. A special thank you to the wonderful Patreons supporting me on patreon.com/connectingnodots. You guys rock, and your support helps me start making more videos faster. As usual, nothing here is investment advice, and I am heavily invested in Tesla stocks and options. Now buckle up and get ready, because this video is about huge disruption, and disruption is never boring. Preface: The Valley of Death. My friend JPR007 thoroughly analyzes on Tesla Twitter, the auto industry, and disruptive companies. If you aren't doing it already, I highly recommend following him on Twitter. Take a look at this graph, which forecasts the global auto market, disregarding robotaxis and unforeseen events such as COVID. The top end of the bars shows the global demand for automobiles, meaning how many new cars are required each year. This demand grows year after year in a slow exponential way. The black bars are actual internal combustion engine vehicle sales in previous years, and the dark gray bars predict future demand for ICE and hybrid cars. Since EVs will soon become cheaper to buy than comparable ICE cars, demand for ICE is expected to quickly fall, as most people will prefer to get an EV, which is cheaper to buy, much cheaper to operate, much more reliable, and also cleaner, greener, and with better performance. The blue lines are EV sales, and normally you'd expect them to fill the entire gap between ICE sales and demand for cars, meaning anybody who needs a car either buys ICE or an EV. However, EV production is currently small and takes time to ramp up. The gap will ultimately be closed, as seen in the right-hand side of the graph, but until enough EV factories are built and ramped up, demand will be higher than supply, and many people will just delay their purchase until they can get an EV. This forms the Valley of Death, where ICE cars sell in dwindling numbers, And since OEMs fight over smaller and smaller sales, margins on these cars will quickly go to zero. If you think this won't happen, it already is. I urge you to reconsider after checking these graphs of GM and Ford sales. Breaking. The invasion starts now. But guess what? The valley of death is about to get smaller. If you're an OEM and think this is good news, it's not, because the valley will get smaller due to an incoming flood of Chinese cars. In other words, prepare for the Chinese invasion. We've known for several years that the Chinese have their eyes set on taking a huge portion of Western car sales, but we didn't know when this would happen. Well, my friends, the time has come, and September 2021 marks the start of a huge Chinese invasion. Chapter 1. Meanwhile in China, or the training of a warrior. Thousands of years ago, Chinese general Sun Tzu wrote in his book The Art of War, "Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will win every battle." He also wrote that if you're weaker than your enemy, you should avoid fighting them. Instead, you should quietly build your army for war and attack by surprise when the time is right. In my eyes, this is exactly what's happening in the Chinese EV market. China knew its ICE cars don't stand a chance against Western competition, but it saw EVs as a new market where OEMs were lagging, and they could get an early mover's advantage. They also wanted to reduce pollution, so the government offered incentives and set positive regulations, which promoted building of EV factories, developing new technologies, and copying Western ones. China doesn't only have the biggest EV market in the world, but also the largest number of EV manufacturers. They have over 500 EV brands, and the government has recently set directives that they want to see mergers and acquisitions resulting with far less brands. This should promote a survival of the fittest scenario, ending with a few huge players who are stronger, larger, and fitter to fight it in Western markets. So just a few years ago, Chinese cars were the laughingstock of the world. But fast forward a few years and the ugly, unreliable death machines were replaced with stylish and modern EVs, second only to Tesla, and far better than other Western OEMs. Throughout the video, I'll show footage of such modern EVs to give you an idea. So as Sun Tzu suggested, the Chinese spent years building their army away from sight by focusing on domestic sales and learning to build good EVs and growing their capacity. And to learn their enemy, Chinese manufacturers dipped their toes into Western markets by starting to sell their secondary brands such as MG and Polestar. And now they're finally ready to start an all-out war and start conquering Western markets. Chapter 2. Why now? I said that September 2021 officially marks the start of this offensive. It's clear that Chinese manufacturers have become much better, but how can I be so specific regarding the date? Chinese manufacturers heavily use LFP batteries, which have lower energy density but are very safe and have long useful lifetime. More importantly, since lithium, iron, and phosphates are abundant, LFP batteries are inexpensive to produce and can be made in huge capacities. But there's a caveat. The limiting factor recently showed in his excellent video about LFP batteries that they're covered by patents, which significantly raise their cost. However, Chinese manufacturers were granted an exemption from paying for these patents on batteries produced for domestic consumption. This means that Chinese manufacturers could sell LFP-powered EVs at home without paying for patent rights, but if exporting these same cars, they would have to pay for the rights. And guess what? All LFP patents finally expired in September 2021, which means that last month, the Chinese car industry got the green light it needed to sell abroad. Chapter 3. They have the capacity. So, Chinese manufacturers can now sell in Europe and USA, but do they have the capacity to do so while also catering to the domestic market? The answer is yes. Chinese manufacturers have been operating at 48.5% average capacity. Some of this is undoubtedly due to small companies unable to sell as many EVs as they geared up to build. But the fact remains that China could almost double its production as it is, and that's without even taking into account the huge number of new factories currently being built. Add to this that, as Tesla showed us, even at limited capacity, it is much more profitable to export to Europe than to sell domestically, and it becomes obvious that Chinese manufacturers are definitely gearing up for export, which should significantly shrink the valley of death. Chapter 4. Signs showing that now is true. Some of you might object to my theory that the expiration of LFP patents marks the green light for the Chinese tsunami. You might also add that Chinese EV companies are in fact diversified and also use other battery chemistries such as NMC. So first, I see LFP as their mainstay battery, which will allow them to sell at ultra-low prices while avoiding the risk of battery fires, which could easily ruin the image of reliability and safety that the Chinese brands will have to build. Also, there are many signs that the invasion has just begun. To keep it concise, I'll focus on BYD, but similar signs could be shown for other companies too. You need signs that U.S. sales are just around the corner? How about this September 17th tweet from Bridget McCarthy, that BYD has started hiring for U.S. passenger vehicle sales? You think they'll leave Europe to Western OEMs? Read this September 30th Yahoo Finance article about the Chinese starting to ramp up. And since 80% of lithium-ion batteries are made in China, cars are only one of the markets they're after. I'm sure you know how Tesla Energy sells energy storage products from Powerwalls to Megapacks and uses AutoBidder to take part in wholesale energy trading and act as a distributed utility. But did you know that BYD has now started doing the same? BYD just joined forces with Vitol, which is a private company, so might be unknown to us. In fact, Vitol is the largest independent energy trading company in the world and ranks around number 9 on the Fortune 500 list. So, BYD just joined this behemoth of a power trader to start producing EV charging infrastructure and to take part in energy storage and trading projects. And unlike Tesla, BYD makes all its batteries, including LFP, which is just about ideal for energy storage projects. Chapter 5. Can Western OEMs retaliate in China? If the Chinese are coming to Europe and the US, can Western automakers hit them on their own turf? No chance. First, aside of Tesla, most Western OEMs have only started recently to seriously make EVs. They're on their first or second gen cars, while Tesla and the Chinese are on their third gen, after learning from many previous mistakes. I used to be a GM fan and would love for GM to succeed, but despite all its recent fanfare, GM is greatly lagging. GM has to recall all the EVs that LG made for them and is currently gearing up for their first try of making a modern EV on their own, while hoping these won't catch fire too. Meanwhile, the Chinese are running fast with their third-gen cars in factories. But let's put this aside. Even if GM does everything right and hits the Hummer EV and Cadillac Lyriq out of the ballpark, this doesn't matter one bit. Also, you might be a Ford or BMW fan and say that the Mach-E or BMW iX are much better than any Tesla or Chinese product. Fine. But even if that was true, this doesn't matter either. And it doesn't matter because Ford, GM, and BMW are just starting out with their EV plans. So until they get to high volume, their production costs remain high and they're losing money on almost each car. Meanwhile, the Chinese provide third-generation cars at much lower prices and make a profit selling them. And besides losing money on EVs, every EV they sell means one less profitable ICE car sold, so the OEMs are dragging their feet and ramping up slowly. Meanwhile, profitable Tesla and the Chinese are going pedal to the metal and zooming fast forward in a banshee whale. VW might just make it, but Ford, GM, and BMW don't stand a chance. Chapter 6. How this will affect Ford stocks, GM share price, and BMW valuation.
It's going to be the same scenario as when the Japanese first started to come into the United States. The paint job was great. The fit and finish was unheard of. And it was reliable. You could not beat these things, and that's what's happening now. Only difference is it's going to be the Chinese and Tesla that mop the floors with the other guys.
Yeah.
We have a lot of experts here in Munro, and we're going to talk about what we think is going to happen in the next 5 years, because it's going to be earth-shattering. These guys that are hoping that people are going to come back to the good old days or the old-fashioned ways are in for a giant surprise. We all pretty much know that these companies won't die, at least not right away, but they're going to come real close to death, and they're definitely going to be losing market share. And I can tell you what, I'm going to show you some stuff that's really going to make you wonder how these guys are even going to survive next week, let alone the next 10 years. Yeah, so I think VW is in deep trouble, but I also think that pretty much everybody is in trouble now. They believed the wrong people, and they did nothing. Well, You do nothing in this industry and it's like you're being in a parade. You sit down for a while and the elephants are right in back of you. They'll crush you like a bug. There are at least 30 Chinese car companies that would definitely be able to take a shot at not just Tesla, but Ford, Volkswagen, everybody. There's Toyota. There's no... Thinking that the good old days are going to stick around is ridiculous. I can tell you that in the 70s, in the early 70s, General Motors had about 50% market share. Now they got 14. Watch how that shrinks when the Chinese start showing up. People that talk about companies and whatnot that are really exciting to them, the number one is NIO. But Geely's already here. They own Volvo. BYD, BAIC, Shanghai Automotive. There's a ton of cars that are going to be coming in our direction. And I'm telling you what, there's going to be a ton to pick from, and they are really good. No bad gaps in panels. They've been taught by, oh yeah, me. I guarantee you that these guys are going to be coming in with products that are going to be equivalent to or maybe better than quite a number of European and American car companies. So there's a ton of them. XPeng doesn't have to steal, and they don't have to imitate either. XPeng, NIO, all these other guys that I mentioned, it used to be that BYD was borrow your design. Those days are gone. If you start thinking for a second, just for a second, that the Chinese are just a flash in the pan or they don't have anything truly to offer, remember, we have virtually no battery manufacturing here. None. We have virtually no ability to really compete on a proper level with any of our circuit boards and whatnot. Almost everything we need comes from China. They know how to make components, and they got tons of people that can put them together. If you're thinking that China is just a flash in the pan, you're out of your mind.
Reminding you that none of this is investing advice, and you should do your own research before touching your investments. Also, I am heavily invested in Tesla, and while making this video, I also invested a small amount in BYD stocks. It's extremely small, less than 0.1% of my investment in Tesla stocks, but seeing their growth potential, I decided I want in. With that in mind, here's what I think. Stock prices are a direct result of company valuation, which by itself should reflect company fundamentals as well as expected growth. And frankly, things don't look too well for Western OEMs. Ford, GM, and BMW have publicly stated that they plan to sell ICE vehicles for many years to come, and this just won't happen. Very soon, Western markets will see a flood of Chinese EVs, most of them with excellent quality, great design, and all this at a much lower purchase price than comparable ICE cars. The Valley of Death in JPR's 007's graphs will be shorter than expected, with a much faster rise in EV sales, but a much more dramatic fall in ICE sales. More importantly, where OEMs see ICE as their cash cow that will fund their EV development, as demand falls, margins on ICE will fall to near zero. Ford, GM, and BMW all have huge debt to pay. Margins on their ICE sales will soon fall to zero. GM has yet to sell a single modern EV of its own design. BMW doesn't even have a dedicated EV platform in their product plan. And every month, Ford makes as many Mach-E's globally as Tesla sold Model 3s in June in Israel alone. The future for these companies is bleak. I never short any company, but I wouldn't touch their stocks with a 10-foot pole. And mark this month in your calendar, because from this month on, the automotive landscape in the West will speak more and more Chinese. That's it, guys. What do you think? Am I right or am I wrong? Will the Chinese start their invasion now, or do Western OEMs still have time to get their act together? Will GM, Ford, and BMW go belly up, or should we believe mainstream media and start investing in their stocks? And if any of them fail, which company do you see going bankrupt first? I'd love to hear what you think. I read all your comments. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe to help me start growing the channel and to get notified on the second part of this video. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon for as low as $1 a month. It'll really help me invest more time so I can deliver quality content faster. So if you want to support the channel, you can head over to patreon.com and together we can make this channel grow. I've started working on my next video, which is part 2 of my interview about Tesla AI Day with a friend who's the outstanding CTO of an AI-intensive company. I'll do my best to release it soon, and if you haven't watched part 1, just click on the card above. A special shout out to my planet builder and producer Patreon, Paul Meyer. You truly rock, and your trust in me means a lot. A huge shout out to my other Patreons, Sebastian Bergman, Klaus Miller, Ronald M. Harrison, Catherine L., and Ken Trudel. You all rock, and I truly appreciate your support. Feel free to contact me and follow me on Twitter, where I am Connecting No Dots. I really appreciate your being here. It means a lot. Till next time, I am Connecting the Dots, and you are amazing.